Bismillahirrahmanirrahim and Assalamu alaikum. If you're interested in watching a video about the LUMS fee hike, then you'll probably know that I've been cast as the one of the villains in this whole drama. My name is Ali Hasnain and I chair the Department of Economics. It's important to explain at the offset that I've never seen how they've come up with the tuition plans, the fee structures. I don't have a say in the larger spending, and don't know where we spend most of our money. What I do know is how the economics department obviously spends its money, but some of these larger things I'm just sort of viewing from the same perspective as you. But I thought I'd put together a slide deck to discuss some of the issues here, to explain them, but also to take this as a moment to get into explaining a lot of the sort of underlying dynamics at play here from an economist perspective. So let's start by talking about how we might move from the per semester structure that we've had before to the per unit structure that we have now, assuming that what LUMS is trying to do is be revenue neutral. We're not trying to earn more money from you, but what we want to do is move the calculations. And by doing this, what we'll try to do is reach a calculation, and then you can compare this against what LUMS is offering, and then we can enter into a larger discussion about what's going on. And so what we need critically to get at a correct answer for this is to understand the average time that students take to graduate, which is probably a number between 7 and 8 semesters. I don't know exactly, but let's assume that it takes you 7.5 semesters. We're using this as a ballpark number. It's probably close to the correct amount, but I just want to explain how this calculation is going to be done, and you can use it as a placeholder. You do your own math afterwards once we understand what the correct number is. And if we do, once I do get that information, I might tweet about it or something else. So you can do that. So what this implies is that an average cost to graduate, remember, so first of all, remember that 7.5 semesters is what it takes the average student, we're assuming, to graduate. So what that means is that an average cost to graduate on the per semester fee structure was in 2019 rupees 2.5 million over the 4 years. Right? And so this is just 7.5 times your per semester charge in 2019. Of course, other years you've paid less, but because we've also had inflation, I'm just using the number from 1 year for simplicity. Again, if you're interested in doing this in a more complex way, take your previous tuition fees, inflate it to correct for inflation, inflate it using State Bank's CPI numbers, and you can do that math, but I'm not going to get into that. So we're assuming that 2019 are the dollars that we're playing in for now. What this does is it means that, so remember that we're doing this calculation on average. But what it means is that if you study faster, you need to pay less, and if you study slower, you need to pay more, right? You probably understand, all of you who've been on the previous structure probably understand that this is how it works. If we're giving you the same price for the privilege of taking 12 units or 20, then the more units you take, the more likely it becomes that you'll graduate in 7 semesters and you end up saving 1 semester's worth. But for LUMS, what we have to do is think about how to get total revenue equal to total cost. And so we need to create a rule or a plan for you guys that on average gives us the amount of money, which we've calculated here, 2,551,500. This is the average amount that we need in order to cover our costs. Assuming, of course, that this number does cover our costs, and that's a separate topic we'll come to later. So just let's pause and think, why the hell are we doing this? Why move to a per unit structure? When you study faster and you pay less, and you study slower and you pay more, remember that this is only what the student faces. It does not reflect the costs of the university, right? Now, for LUMs, students studying faster and finishing in 7 semesters or studying slower and finishing in 8 semesters, these two students on the 7 semester or the 8 semester speed actually creates very little difference in costs for us, right? Why is that? Because, well, contracts are long term or annual. So I have to teach, let's say, 2 or 3 courses a year. LUMS doesn't sort of pay me differently depending on which semester I'm teaching it in, I'm sorry. Buildings have to operate, and there is a negligible impact on utilities in, let's say, spring. If there are less people around, we still have to light up pretty much the whole campus. We still have to heat up in winter the whole campus and so on, or cool it in summer. And these things, there's a slight, maybe fractional decrease in cost if you have less people around, but it's really negligible. It's the difference between turning the lights off in one room versus keeping them on in the other. And that's really a small thing in the larger scheme of keeping the entire university open. So again, for LUMs, students studying faster and students studying slower doesn't really change our costs. But remember that we're earning less money from people who are studying faster than students studying slower. But because we are committed to being not-for-profit or revenue neutral, that means that we still have to cover our total costs. And the way that we do that is by creating a plan which gives you a semester cost. And this unfortunately means that because we're charging the same average cost to graduate by semester, that students who graduate in 8 semesters and paying more are subsidizing the education of students who are studying faster and graduating in 7 semesters. We'll come back to this later. And now we're going to move back to thinking about the per unit fee structure and why and how to make that move. But I hope it's clear what the theoretical argument for moving to a per unit structure is. And of course, people have made points about how there are problems with this. That's something that I'll come to later on. So we've said first that we need to know the average time to graduate, and I'm assuming it's 7.5 semesters, and given that 7.5 semesters times semester cost for you right now means that we are charging you currently in 2019 rupees 2.5 million rupees. And our constraint is that we must be revenue neutral. So in other words, we have to create a per unit fee structure that gets us this amount of money from every student. And so what we do is simply divide this amount by 130, which is the number of units you need to graduate, and we get a value of 19,627 in 2019 rupees. Now, incorporate the 13% inflation adjustment, and this works out to 22,000 roughly rupees that we have to charge you per unit in order to earn from every student the same amount that we were earning from students on average before. Okay? So this is per my assumptions. This is not necessarily a perfectly correct amount, and it's based on, as I said earlier, the 7.5 average. If you graduate quicker in 7.2, we have to do the whole thing again with that number. If you're graduating later in 8, again we have to recalculate. Now, if a per unit rate of 24,000 rupees is being charged, which has been communicated so far, your costs have increased in real terms after accounting for inflation. For students finishing in 7 semesters, it means that your costs are going up 16% after inflation. For students finishing in 7.5, it means 8.7%. And for students finishing in 8 semesters, it still means almost 2% increase after inflation. So the takeaway from this section is that the university's current calculations of your per unit fees and mine don't match. Now, internally, I believe that the university is actually already going back through this calculation and double checking it. More information is expected soon. But what I want you to sort of take away from this is that whenever the university does give you that unit rate, you should be able to do the math to figure out whether you're in fact paying more or less than you were earlier. And again, critical to this is average time to graduate. So I suggest that you monitor this. Now, once we've figured out how the from per semester to per unit calculation is done, remember that we've also changed your incentive structure.